Layla Williams had spent her entire life surrounded by power, wealth, and expectations. The daughter of renowned financial mogul Charles Williams, she had been raised to be ambitious, disciplined, and unshakable. From a young age, she knew she wanted to be more than just another heiress living off her family's fortune. She wanted to make a difference. Her passion led her to medicine, where she defied all expectations and became a highly respected cardiothoracic surgeon. Her work consumed most of her time, but she didn't mind. She had saved lives, earned the admiration of her colleagues, and built an identity separate from her family name. Yet, as successful as she was, there was always an underlying sense of loneliness that she couldn't quite shake. That loneliness was the last thing on her mind the night she met Jason Barkley. It was an evening of opulence, filled with the usual glittering chandeliers, soft classical music, and champagne flowing like water. The gala was a charity event hosted by one of her father's business partners, a place where New York's elite gathered to flaunt their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. Layla had attended out of obligation, not expecting anything more than the usual empty conversations and superficial smiles. But then, in the midst of it all, she met Jason. He was different from the men in her world, at least, that's how it seemed. While others sought to impress her with their connections and fortunes, Jason had an effortless charm, an easy confidence that didn't rely on wealth or status. A self-made businessman, he spoke with passion about his architectural firm, his dreams of designing spaces that were not just luxurious but meaningful. He listened to her, genuinely intrigued by her work as a surgeon, making her feel seen in a way few ever had. Layla had been skeptical at first. She was no stranger to men who saw her as a trophy, another asset to be acquired. But Jason wasn't like them, at least, that's what she convinced herself. He didn't seem intimidated by her career or resentful of her success. He admired her. He made her feel special, reminding her of what it was like to be desired for who she was, not for what she represented. Her best friend, Rachel, had been wary from the beginning. "I just don't want you to get swept up too fast," she had warned, eyes filled with concern. "Guys like him, they can seem perfect at first." Layla had laughed it off. "Not everything is a red flag, Rach. He's kind. He supports me. Isn't that what matters?" Rachel hadn't pushed further, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. Even Layla's parents, particularly her father, had reservations. "Love is one thing," Charles had told her, his voice measured, "but marriage is a partnership. Make sure you know what you're getting into." But Layla had brushed off their concerns. Love wasn't about logic, it was about trust, about believing in someone even when others doubted them. And she believed in Jason. Their courtship was a whirlwind, filled with passionate nights, whispered promises, and stolen moments where the rest of the world faded away. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. So when he proposed under a canopy of stars, holding her hands with such sincerity, she had said yes without hesitation. The wedding was grand yet intimate, a perfect blend of her family's wealth and Jason's personal touch. As they exchanged vows, Layla felt certain she had made the right choice. This was her happily ever after, the love story she had always dreamed of. But even in that perfect moment, as Jason slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her like she was the only woman in the world, a small voice deep inside whispered, "Are you sure?" She silenced it. After all, love was about taking chances. And she had just taken the biggest one of her life. Layla had always believed that love, real love, was about trust and compromise. Marriage, she told herself, would be no different. The honeymoon in Santorini was breathtaking, whitewashed villas perched on cliffs, the endless blue of the Aegean stretching before them. Jason had planned everything perfectly, down to the candlelit dinners on secluded terraces and the slow walks through cobbled streets under the soft glow of lanterns. He was attentive, affectionate, always reaching for her hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face, whispering how lucky he was to have her. For the first few weeks, life with Jason was everything she had hoped for. He texted her during long shifts at the hospital, sending little messages of love and encouragement. He cooked for her when she came home late, always waiting up no matter how exhausted he was. She felt cherished, protected. But then, small things began to shift. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, little moments that made her pause but never long enough to question. He would make a comment about her schedule, jokingly calling her Dr. Workaholic when she stayed at the hospital late. If she came home exhausted, he would sigh and say, "I barely see my wife these days." At first, she laughed it off, reassuring him that things would settle. Then came the first real argument. It was over something small. One of her colleagues, Dr. Evan Carter, had texted her about a difficult surgery. Jason had seen the name light up on her phone and frowned. "Do you always get texts from male colleagues this late?" he had asked, his tone light but laced with something beneath the surface. Layla had blinked, surprised. "It's about a patient, Jason. It's not personal." He had nodded, brushing it off, but later that night, he had asked again, this time with a forced chuckle. "You sure he's just a colleague?" It had unsettled her, but she had dismissed it. Maybe he was just insecure. Maybe he just loved her too much. Soon, Jason's protectiveness bled into other aspects of their life. He started commenting on her wardrobe, never outright criticizing, but suggesting alternatives. "That dress is nice," he would say, "but don't you think something less tight would be more elegant?" He wanted to pick her outfits for galas, saying he had a better eye for what suited her best. If she disagreed, he would smile and say, "I just want you to look perfect." Layla told herself it was harmless. What husband didn't want his wife to look her best? Then the finances. One evening, while curled up on the couch, Jason had brought up the subject of merging their accounts. "It's just practical," he had said. "We're a team now, Layla. No more mine and yours, just ours." She hesitated. She had always managed her own money, a habit ingrained from years of financial independence. "I don't mind sharing expenses," she said carefully, "but I'd still like to keep my personal account." Jason's jaw tightened, just for a second. Then, he laughed. "Of course, sweetheart. I just figured it'd make life easier." That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that she had disappointed him. Then there were the times he would subtly make her feel guilty for spending time with anyone but him. Rachel had invited her for brunch one Sunday, just like they always had before she got married. Layla had been looking forward to it, but when she mentioned it, Jason had sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was hoping we could have a quiet day together," he had said. "I barely get to spend time with you." It was the way he said it, the slight sadness in his voice, that made her hesitate. He wasn't angry, he was hurt. So she had cancelled. Rachel had raised an eyebrow when Layla made an excuse. "You don't have to bail every time he pouts, you know." "He's not pouting," Layla had defended. He wants to be with me." Rachel hadn't looked convinced. The weeks stretched on, and the red flags continued to bloom, so soft, so subtle, that they almost felt like whispers instead of warnings. Jason would insist on handling things, making decisions without consulting her, booking vacations without asking if she had time off, buying furniture she hadn't agreed to. When she brought it up, he would kiss her forehead and say, "I just wanted to surprise you, sweetheart. You work so hard, you don't need to worry about the little things." And for a while, Layla let herself believe that. She let herself believe that this was love. But love, real love, wasn't supposed to feel like something slipping through her fingers. And though she couldn't put it into words just yet, something deep inside her was beginning to stir. Layla had always prided herself on being independent. She had built a career on discipline, on making life-or-death decisions in the operating room without hesitation. But outside of work, in the quiet moments of her marriage, she found herself second-guessing everything. At first, she told herself it was normal, adjusting to marriage took time. Jason was her husband now, and marriage meant compromise. But slowly, without her realizing it, the compromises were no longer mutual. They were always hers. It started with the finances. Layla had never been the type to micromanage money. She had always been responsible, but she never obsessed over numbers. She made more than enough, and she trusted Jason. So when he suggested that he take over paying the bills and managing their joint expenses, she hadn't thought much of it. "It'll take something off your plate," he had said, rubbing her shoulders after a long shift. "You work crazy hours. Let me handle the boring stuff." She had smiled, grateful. It sounded reasonable. Practical, even. But then, she started noticing the discrepancies. A charge on their credit card for an expensive watch, one she had never seen Jason wear. Large withdrawals that didn't match any of their bills. A significant amount missing from the joint savings account. One evening, she finally asked, "Jason, what's this charge for?" She pointed at the bank statement on her laptop, her tone calm but firm. Jason glanced at it and waved a hand dismissively. Oh, that? I invested in a new project. It's going to double our savings in a year. She frowned.
Vill telling me?
He exhaled sharply, setting down his fork. Layla, I handle our finances. You trust me, don't you? Her stomach twisted. It wasn't the words themselves but the way he said them, as if her questioning him was a betrayal. Still, she let it go. Then came the control over her time. She had always worked long shifts, but now, every time she came home late, Jason made sure she felt guilty about it. You're never here, he murmured one night as she crawled into bed past midnight. I feel like I barely have a wife. She sighed, exhausted.
Jason, you knew my job before we got married.
It's not like this is new. He turned away from her, his voice laced with quiet resentment. Yeah, but I thought maybe you'd prioritize your marriage a little more.
The words stung.
Layla lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she really was being unfair. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't making enough time for him. So she started adjusting. She cut back on social outings with Rachel. She skipped a conference she had been looking forward to. She made an effort to be home earlier, even if it meant pushing off responsibilities at work. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. One evening, she came home to find Jason in the middle of a heated phone call. He was pacing the living room, his jaw tight. The moment he saw her, he ended the call abruptly. She hesitated. Everything okay? Jason forced a smile.
Just business.
Something in his tone put her on edge. She had always admired his ambition, but lately, there was a desperation in the way he talked about money. Weeks passed, and the tension grew. Jason's comments became sharper. His patience thinner. You sound ridiculous when you talk like that, he said one evening at a dinner party when she had been passionately discussing a new medical technique with colleagues. She had laughed awkwardly, brushing it off, but the humiliation burned deep. And then the isolation. Rachel noticed it first. Layla, we barely see you anymore, she said one afternoon when they finally met for coffee. Every time I ask you to hang out, you're busy. But you're not working more than usual. So what's going on?
Layla hesitated.
Jason he likes spending time together. And he gets upset when I cancel on him.
Rachels Expression darkened.
Layla, that's not normal. You're allowed to have your own life. Layla wanted to argue, to defend her husband. But deep down, she knew Rachel was right. Something was wrong.
And the worst part?
She had no idea how to fix it. Layla's world was slowly shrinking, and she wasn't sure when she had stopped fighting against it. At work, she was still Dr. Layla Williams, the brilliant, respected cardiothoracic surgeon whose hands had saved countless lives. But at home, she felt like someone else entirely, someone whose voice no longer carried weight, whose choices were questioned at every turn. Jason's control had tightened in ways she hadn't fully understood until she looked around and realized how isolated she had become. She saw it in the way Rachel's calls had slowed, then stopped altogether. She saw it in the way her parents' invitations to visit had been met with Jason's well-timed plans. Trips, business dinners, something that always took priority. At first, she had resisted. She had pushed back against Jason's quiet but persistent disapproval of the people in her life. But he had a way of making her feel selfish for wanting anything outside of him. I thought marriage meant being each other's priority, he had said one night, after she told him she was meeting Rachel for dinner. But if you'd rather be with her than your own husband, go ahead. Layla had hesitated, torn. And when she stayed home, choosing to make peace instead of arguing, Jason had wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "See, we're happier when it's just us." She had wanted to believe him. But happiness didn't feel like this. The financial discrepancies she had once brushed off became impossible to ignore. Her credit card was declined at a grocery store, which made no sense. Her salary was more than enough to cover expenses. Confused, she checked her accounts, only to find that her personal savings had been drained. Her stomach dropped. Jason. It had to be him. She confronted him that night, her hands shaking as she held up the bank statement. "Where did the money go, Jason?" He was calm. Too calm. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I moved it into an investment," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You never pay attention to these things, Layla. I did what was best for us. Layla's breath hitched. Best for us? Without even asking me. Jason's face darkened. Why do you always assume the worst?
I'm your husband. Do you think I did ever do anything to hurt you?
The gaslighting was so smooth, so effortless, that for a moment, she actually doubted herself. Maybe she had been inattentive. Maybe she had failed to check the accounts regularly. Maybe Jason really had just been trying to take care of things. But deep down, beneath all the justifications, the truth simmered. He had taken her money. He had taken her choices. And now, she wasn't sure what was left of her that still belonged to her alone. At the hospital, her work began to suffer. She had always been sharp-focused, but now she found herself distracted during surgeries, missing minor details she never would have overlooked before. Dr. Carter, her colleague, pulled her aside one evening. Layla, are you okay? You seem off. She forced a smile. I'm just tired. Long shifts. He hesitated. If you ever need to talk. I'm fine, she interrupted quickly. But she wasn't fine. She was unraveling, and Jason made sure she had no one left to catch her when she fell. He became unpredictable. Some days, he was the loving husband she had married, attentive, gentle, showering her with affection. Other days, his mood shifted without warning. One night, she arrived home later than expected. Jason was waiting in the living room, his expression unreadable. Where were you? I had an emergency surgery, she said, setting down her bag. He nodded, but something about the way he was watching her made her uneasy. Why didn't you text? She blinked. Jason, I was in the OR. I couldn't just. Do you know how it feels to sit here, wondering if your wife even thinks about you? His voice was low, quiet, but the edge was unmistakable. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't about a text message. This was about control. He wanted her to feel guilty, to apologize, to shrink. And for the first time, Layla felt something beneath the fear. Rage. But she buried it, the way she always did, telling herself that she needed to be careful. Because the truth was becoming clear. Jason wasn't just controlling. He was dangerous. And if she wanted to survive this marriage, she needed to start planning her way out. Layla had spent years making life-and-death decisions with steady hands. She had looked into the eyes of families and told them she would do everything in her power to save their loved ones, and she always had. But the woman she saw in the mirror now was not that same surgeon. This woman was tired. This woman was trapped. And tonight, this woman was done. It started with a single email. Layla had been in the hospital's break room, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. When she finally did what she had been too afraid to do for weeks, she checked her personal bank accounts. Her fingers trembled as she logged in. The savings account? Completely drained. The emergency fund she had spent years building? Gone. And then she saw it. A wire transfer. Jason. The reality hit her like a punch to the gut. He had stolen everything from her, and she had let him. No. He took it because he thought she wouldn't fight back. But he was wrong. That night, when she walked into the house, Jason was sitting in his usual spot in the living room, sipping whiskey as if he didn't have a single care in the world. She dropped her bag by the door, her body rigid with fury. Where's my money, Jason? He looked up lazily, arching an eyebrow. Excuse me.
You hurt me.
She stepped closer, her voice shaking. You drained my savings. You didn't just move it, you took it. Jason sighed, setting his glass down. Layla, you're overreacting. I told you, I'm handling our finances. No. You're handling your finances.
With my money.
Something flickered in his eyes, something dark. He stood up, walking toward her slowly, his movements controlled, calculated. I think, he said softly, you need to calm down. Layla's pulse pounded in her ears. No, she snapped. I'm done being calm.
I'm done letting you control me.
His jaw tightened. You're my wife. Everything I do is for us. She let out a bitter laugh. Us? You don't even see me as a person, Jason. You see me as a possession. His face twisted, and for the first time she saw it clearly. The man beneath the charm, the man who had been slowly dismantling her life piece by piece. Then, he said something that made her blood run cold. "If you leave me, I will destroy you." Layla didn't flinch. She had spent too long fearing this moment. But now that she was standing in it, she realized something. Jason wasn't invincible. He was a coward. A man who only had power as long as she let him have it. She met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "No, Jason. You don't get to control me anymore." Then she turned, walked upstairs, and locked the bedroom door behind her. She had made her decision. She was leaving. But she knew Jason wouldn't let her go without a fight. Layla lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in her chest. Jason was downstairs, and she could still hear the faint clink of ice against his whiskey glass. The air between them had shifted, no more pretense, no more carefully placed words. The lines had been drawn. He knew she wanted out. And that made him dangerous. She turned onto her side, pressing her palm against her stomach as if she could steady the churning inside her. She needed a plan. If she confronted Jason again without a way to protect herself, he would find a way to pull her back in. That was what he did. He twisted reality until she questioned her own mind. Not this time. The next morning, she waited until Jason left for the office before she made her first call. Rachel answered on the second ring. "Layla." Her best friend's voice was cautious, uncertain. It had been months since they'd spoken properly. Jason had made sure of that. Layla's throat tightened. "I need help." A pause. And then, without hesitation, "Where are you? Do you need me to come get you?" The sheer relief of those words made Layla's eyes sting. "Not yet," she whispered. "I have to be careful. But I'm leaving him, Ratch. I need a plan." Rachel exhaled sharply, but there was no surprise in her voice, only quiet, burning anger. "I'll help you." Layla ran a shaking hand through her hair. "I need a lawyer. A good one." "I know someone," Rachel said immediately. "Monika Grent. She specializes in high-profile divorces, and she does not lose." Layla swallowed. "Can you set up a meeting?" "Already on it." For the first time in months, Layla felt something like hope. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Monika Grant in a sleek downtown office. The attorney was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and exuded the kind of confidence that made even the strongest men nervous. "You've come to the right place," Monika said, flipping through the notes she had taken during their meeting. "But this won't be easy." She set the pen down and looked Layla in the eye. "Your husband comes from old money. His family has power, connections. He'll try to manipulate the courts." Layla clenched her fists. "I don't care. I just want out." Monika nodded. "Then we start now. First, we separate your finances. Legally, Jason had no right to drain your accounts, but proving financial abuse takes time. We need to move your remaining assets before he tries to cut you off completely." Layla's stomach turned. "He already has access to everything." Monika smiled, but it was sharp, ruthless. "Then we play dirty." She laid out a strategy. Step 1. Layla would quietly move any remaining funds into a protected account under her name only. Step 2. She would change all passwords, bank accounts, credit cards, even hospital payroll deposits, so Jason couldn't touch them. Step 3. She would begin documenting everything. Every text, every transaction, every instance of manipulation and control. And Step 4. Layla asked. Monika leaned forward. "We prepare for war." Layla's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "And if he fights back?" Monika's smile didn't waver. "He will. Men like Jason always do. But if you're ready to fight, I'll make sure you win." Layla exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to power. But she still had one last battle to face before she could walk away.
Jason wouldn't let her go without a final act of control.
And she needed to be ready. Layla lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards and the distant hum of Jason's television downstairs. She knew he was still awake. He never went to bed early after an argument, especially one like tonight. He was stewing, waiting for her to break, to crawl back to him and apologize like she always had before. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't going to let him win. She turned onto her side, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Jason had drained her savings account, leaving her with barely anything to stand on. He had taken complete control of their finances without her consent, and if she didn't act fast, he would make sure she had nothing left. She needed a plan. A real one. The next morning, she waited for Jason to leave for the office before making her first move. As soon as the front door shut behind him, she sprang into action, grabbing her phone and dialing the only person she could trust. Rachel picked up on the second ring.
Layla.
Her best friend's voice was hesitant, cautious. Layla closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. It had been months since they'd spoken properly. Jason had seen to that. He had made sure she was isolated, cutting her off from the people who truly cared about her. "I need help," she whispered.
Silence.
And then, without hesitation, "Where are you?
Do you need them to come get you?"
The immediate offer of help made Layla's chest tighten. "Not yet," she said. "I have to be careful. But I'm leaving him, Ratch. I don't know how to do this." Rachel exhaled sharply, and though her voice remained steady, there was no mistaking the quiet fury behind it. "I'll help you." Layla pressed a hand against her forehead. "I need a lawyer. Someone good." "I know someone," Rachel said immediately. "Monica Grant. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. She doesn't just win cases, she destroys men like Jason." Layla hesitated.
Would she take my case? Rache lädt out ADRY Lauk.
"Oh, she'll take it. You're exactly the kind of woman she fights for." A lump formed in Layla's throat. "I'll set up a meeting," Rachel continued. "In the meantime, do not let Jason suspect anything. Act normal. If he thinks you're planning to leave, he'll make it harder for you." Layla swallowed hard. "I understand." But the truth was, Jason already suspected. He had seen the shift in her, had sensed the growing distance. That was why he had drained her accounts, to remind her that she had nothing without him. But he was wrong. She still had herself. And she was going to take everything back. Later that afternoon, Layla walked into a sleek downtown office, her hands clammy as she approached the receptionist's desk. The entire building radiated power and prestige, with polished marble floors and glass walls that reflected the bright Los Angeles sun. "I have an appointment with Monica Grant," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. The receptionist nodded, motioning toward the waiting area. "She'll be with you shortly." Layla sat down, her knee bouncing anxiously. She had spent her life in control, making high-stakes decisions in the operating room, guiding families through their most devastating moments. But here, sitting in this office, she felt powerless. Then the door to the private office opened, and a woman stepped out. Monica Grant was exactly the kind of lawyer Jason would hate. She was in her 40s, tall and commanding, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and her eyes were sharp, assessing. She extended a hand. "Layla," she said, her voice cool and professional.
Come in.
Layla followed her inside, her heart pounding. Monica gestured for her to sit, then folded her hands on the desk. "Rachel gave me a brief rundown of your situation," she said. "But I want to hear it from you. Tell me everything." Layla inhaled deeply, then began. She told Monica about how Jason had slowly tightened his grip on her life, how he had taken control of their finances, isolated her from her friends, and manipulated her into believing she was the problem. She told her about the way he undermined her confidence, the way he gaslit her into questioning her own decisions. And finally, she told her about the stolen money. Monica listened intently, her face unreadable. When Layla finished, there was silence. Then, Monica sat back and let out a slow breath. "You've come to the right place," she said. "But this won't be easy." Layla straightened. "I don't care. I just want out." Monica nodded. "Good. Then let's start. First, we separate your finances." She leaned forward, tapping her pen against the desk. "Legally, Jason had no right to drain your accounts. But proving financial abuse takes time. We need to move what's left before he tries to cut you off completely." Layla's stomach twisted. He already has access to everything. Monica's lips curled into a razor-sharp smile. Then we play dirty. She laid out a plan. Step 1. Layla would quietly move any remaining funds into a separate account under her name only. Step 2. She would change all passwords, banking, credit cards, even hospital payroll deposits, so Jason couldn't touch them. Step 3. She would begin documenting everything. Every transaction.
Evea manipulative Konversation.
Every single moment of Jason's control.
And step 4.
Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monica leaned forward. We prepare for war.
Layla's fingers curled into fists.
And if he fights back? Monica didn't blink. He will. Men like Jason always do. But if you're ready to fight, I'll make sure you win.
Layla exhaled slowly, something shifting inside her.
For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to power. But she wasn't naive. Jason wasn't going to let her walk away that easily. And the battle was only just beginning. Layla spent the next few days executing Monica's plan with surgical precision. Every action had to be calculated, every move undetectable. She couldn't afford mistakes, not with Jason watching her so closely. The first step was securing her finances. She waited until Jason left for work before making her way to the bank. With Monica's legal backing, she was able to open a new account under her name alone. She transferred what little funds remained, knowing that Jason had already drained the bulk of their joint savings. It wasn't much, but it was something. A start. Then came the passwords. She locked Jason out of everything she could, her hospital payroll, her credit cards, even her email. If he noticed, he didn't mention it. But Layla knew better. Jason was patient. He played the long game, waiting for the moment when she would crumble under his control. Except this time, she wouldn't. By the end of the week, she had taken back more of herself than she had in years. She could breathe again. Think clearly. But she knew this wasn't over. Jason would notice soon. And when he did, he would retaliate. The moment came on a Friday evening. Layla was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing patient notes for an upcoming surgery, when Jason walked in, his expression dark. She barely looked up, until he dropped a stack of bank statements onto the counter. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Layla's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral.
"I don't know."
"Why don't you tell me?" Jason scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Cut the act, Layla. You moved money out of our account. You changed the passwords. What are you up to?" Layla closed her laptop calmly, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm protecting myself, Jason." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "From me?"
Jesus, Layla, juvelosité.
She forced herself to stay steady. "Did I? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who stole from me. You drained our savings. You maxed out credit cards without telling me. You spent our money on your personal ventures, and I let it happen because I thought you were acting in our best interest. But you weren't, were you?" Jason's jaw tightened. "I was managing our finances, like any responsible husband. If you had trusted me." Layla stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Trust? You want to talk about trust? You've lied to me.
Controllt me.
You've manipulated me into thinking I couldn't survive without you. But I can." His expression darkened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "And what? You think you're just going to walk away from this marriage? From me?" Layla's pulse raced, but she held her ground. "I don't think. I know." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken threats. Jason had never laid a hand on her before, but she could see the tension in his body, the way his fingers twitched as if resisting the urge. Then, as quickly as his anger had flared, it vanished. His face smoothed, his voice turning eerily calm. "You're making a mistake, Layla." She swallowed hard. "No. I'm finally making the right choice." Jason exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You think you're so strong. But you don't know what you're walking into. You want a divorce? Fine. Let's see how well you do when you have nothing." A chill ran down her spine. She knew what he was capable of. He would drag her through the courts, try to ruin her reputation, make her regret ever standing up to him. But she had expected this. Monica had warned her. She squared her shoulders.
Du gör vad.
For a moment, Jason simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the empty space, rattling through Layla's bones. She took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. It was done.
The Finalkonfrontation.
The breaking point. Now, there was no going back. The next morning, she put the final phase of her plan into motion. She called Monica. "It's time," Layla said, gripping the phone tightly. Monica didn't hesitate. "Good. I'll file the paperwork today." But Layla wasn't finished. "I want to tell him myself." Monica was silent for a moment. "Are you sure?" Layla nodded, even though Monica couldn't see her. "Yes. I need him to hear it from me." She wasn't going to let Jason control the narrative. Not this time. That night, she sent Jason a text. "Meet me for dinner. We need to talk." A simple request, designed to sound neutral. She knew he would accept. He would see it as an opportunity to manipulate her, to regain the upper hand. But he was about to realize that the game had changed. Layla arrived at the restaurant early, choosing a table near the center of the room where there would be plenty of witnesses. She didn't trust Jason not to lash out, and she wasn't taking any chances. When he walked in, he looked as polished as ever, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression cool and unreadable. He took his seat across from her, studying her carefully. "So," he said, signaling for a waiter. "What's this about?" Layla took a steady breath. "I'm filing for divorce." Jason went still, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, forcing a laugh. "You're upset. We had a fight. This isn't." "It's done, Jason." His smile faltered.
Layla.
She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. "This is from Monica Grant. She's my lawyer. You'll be receiving the official papers tomorrow." Jason's face turned to stone. "You hired Monica Grant?" Layla lifted her chin. "I told you. I'm protecting myself." Jason's jaw clenched. For a moment, she thought he might cause a scene. Then, in a fit of rage, he did the most childish, humiliating thing she had ever seen. He picked up his dessert plate and threw it at her. The slice of chocolate cake hit her square in the face, shocking her into stillness as gasps erupted around the restaurant. A waiter rushed forward, and Jason stood, his chest rising and falling rapidly. But instead of reacting with shame or anger, Layla did something that stunned everyone, including Jason. She wiped the frosting from her face with a napkin, calmly stood up, and smoothed her dress. Then, in the steadiest voice she had ever spoken, she looked Jason in the eye and said, "This is over." And then, with every ounce of dignity she had left, she turned and walked out of the restaurant. For the first time in years, she felt free. Layla stepped out of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The night air was crisp, but she barely felt it. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the remnants of chocolate cake from her cheek. She had done it. She had faced Jason head-on, defied his control, and walked away on her own terms.
But the battle wasn't over.
If anything, it was just beginning. As she reached the curb, a sleek black car pulled up. The tinted window rolled down to reveal Monica, who had been waiting nearby just in case. Her sharp eyes scanned Layla's face, immediately noticing the smudge of chocolate on her cheek and the tension in her shoulders.
"What the hell happened in Tere?"
Monica asked, her voice laced with concern.
Layla exhaled, forcing a small, humorless smile.
"He threw cake at me." Monica blinked. "He what?" Layla let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. "Yeah. Full slice. Right in my face. I guess that was his way of handling rejection."
Monikas Expression darkened.
"That bastard. I hope there were witnesses." Layla nodded. "The whole restaurant saw. And I walked out without a word." Monica's lips curled into a smirk. "Good. That's going to play beautifully in court." Layla's stomach twisted. She knew this wasn't just about leaving Jason. It was about ensuring he didn't try to destroy her in the aftermath. A man like Jason didn't accept defeat quietly. He would fight, clawing for any scrap of control he could retain. "Come on," Monica said, pushing the passenger door open.
Let's get you out of here.
Layla didn't hesitate. She slid into the car, barely sparing a glance back at the restaurant. She didn't need to. Jason was probably still standing there, humiliated, seething with rage. Let him. She had bigger things to focus on now. The ride back to her childhood home was silent, except for the occasional hum of Monica's phone as she fired off emails to their legal team. Layla stared out the window, watching the city blur past her. It had been years since she had been back to her parents' house. After marrying Jason, she had distanced herself from them, partly because of his influence and partly out of pride. She had wanted to prove she could handle her own life, that she didn't need their protection. Now, she was returning as someone different. When the car pulled into the long driveway of her parents' estate, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia washed over her. The grand, ivy-covered home stood tall against the moonlit sky, just as it always had. Warm lights glowed from the windows, a stark contrast to the cold, modern sterility of the mansion she had shared with Jason. Before she could even step out of the car, the front door burst open, and her mother rushed out. Layla. Eleanor Williams had always been a formidable woman, poised, elegant, and strong-willed. But the moment she saw her daughter standing in the driveway, a mixture of cake-stained exhaustion and quiet resolve, her composed exterior cracked.
Oh, sweetheart.
Layla barely had time to react before her mother enveloped her in a fierce hug. The scent of expensive perfume and warm vanilla filled her senses, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to melt into the embrace. "I'm okay," Layla whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was entirely true. Her father, Richard Williams, stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Unlike Eleanor, he wasn't one for overt displays of emotion, but the tightness in his jaw and the way his hands clenched at his sides told Layla everything she needed to know. "You're home now," Eleanor murmured, pulling back to cup Layla's face in her hands. "That's all that matters." Monica cleared her throat from behind them. "I'll have my team update you both on the legal proceedings. Jason is going to retaliate, but we're prepared." Richard finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever he tries, we'll handle it. He won't touch you again." A lump formed in Layla's throat. She had spent so long feeling alone in her marriage, trapped under Jason's control. But here, standing between her parents and Monica, she realized something she had forgotten. She wasn't alone. For the first time in years, she had people in her corner. And that made all the difference. The next morning, Layla woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of her childhood bedroom, casting a golden glow across the familiar space.
She lay for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the realization sink in.
She was free. Not entirely. There was still a divorce to fight, a battle ahead, but the hardest step had already been taken. She had walked away. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stretched, feeling lighter than she had in years. The anxiety was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it no longer consumed her. As she stepped out into the hallway, she heard the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Following the sound, she found her mother at the stove, flipping pancakes with a skill that had never faded. "You made breakfast?" Layla asked, surprised. Eleanor turned, arching an elegant brow. "You sound shocked." Layla smirked. "It's just been a while." Her mother gestured to the seat at the kitchen island. "Sit. Eat. You need your strength." Layla sat down, letting the warmth of the moment settle over her. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this, simple quiet mornings filled with love instead of tension. As she took her first bite, her father walked in, setting his newspaper down with a grunt. Jason's lawyer called this morning. Layla tensed, the peaceful moment shattered. "Already?" Richard nodded. "He's going to fight dirty." Monica had warned her about this. Jason wouldn't take the divorce lying down. He would use every weapon at his disposal, his family's influence, his money, his connections, to paint her as the villain. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand over Layla's. "Let him try. He won't win." Layla swallowed hard, nodding. She had known this wouldn't be easy. Jason was about to show her just how ruthless he could be. But he didn't realize one thing. She was ready for him. This time, she wasn't the woman who cowered in the shadows. She was the woman who had walked out of that restaurant with her head held high. And she wasn't backing down. Layla had known that Jason wouldn't let her go easily. She had prepared herself for resistance, for manipulation, for the venomous retaliation of a man who had built his entire life around control. But knowing it and living it were two different things. The first attack came swiftly. 2 days after leaving him, Layla received a formal letter from Jason's legal team, delivered straight to her parents' estate. It was thick, intimidating, filled with legal jargon designed to unnerve her. But she didn't need to open it to know what it contained. He was challenging everything. Her right to the assets. Her right to custody of Olivia. Her character. Sitting at the long oak dining table in her parents' study, Layla turned the envelope over in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid of losing money. She had always been independent, and she had her parents' support. But Olivia? The thought of Jason trying to take their daughter made her stomach churn with fear and fury. "He's moving fast," Monica said, standing across from her, flipping through a duplicate copy of the documents. She had expected this. Jason's strategy was clear: overwhelm Layla, make her feel like she was drowning before she even had a chance to fight back.
Layla inhalet deeply, ten exhalet.
She had let Jason intimidate her for years. That ended now. "What's his angle?" she asked, her voice steady. Monica leaned against the table, tapping one perfectly manicured nail against the paper. "He's claiming you abandoned the marriage. That you left without warning, without attempting to reconcile. He's painting himself as the heartbroken husband who just wanted to make things work." Layla almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Jason, heartbroken? The same man who had systematically controlled her, manipulated her, stolen from her? "He's also challenging the prenuptial agreement," Monica continued, "arguing that you signed it under duress and that you have no right to any marital assets." Layla clenched her jaw. She had never wanted Jason's money, but the fact that he was twisting reality to make her the villain enraged her.
"And Olivia?"
Monica's expression darkened. "He's going for full custody." Layla's heart stopped. "What?" "He's claiming that you're emotionally unstable and unfit to be a mother. That your sudden decision to leave proves you're reckless." Layla gripped the table, her nails digging into the polished wood. "That's ridiculous. He barely sees Olivia. He spends more time at his office than at home. I'm the one who takes care of her, Monica raised a hand. "I know. And we'll fight it. But Jason doesn't have to win to cause damage. He just has to drag this out long enough to make you suffer." Layla forced herself to breathe. She couldn't afford to let anger cloud her judgment. "What's our move?" Monica's lips curled into a smirk. "We hit back. Hard." The first court hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. Layla spent those weeks preparing, gathering every shred of evidence that would prove Jason's financial abuse, his emotional manipulation, his neglectful behavior as a father. Monica's team compiled bank records, credit card statements, and emails, all showcasing how Jason had drained their joint accounts, made unauthorized transactions, and belittled her whenever she questioned him. But Layla knew the most powerful weapon she had wasn't paperwork. It was truth. She refused to be the woman Jason had spent years molding. She refused to sit in that courtroom looking fragile and unsure, the way he expected. No. She would be strong. The morning of the hearing, she dressed with precision, choosing a navy blue suit that exuded quiet confidence. Her makeup was subtle but flawless. She refused to give Jason the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. As she arrived at the courthouse, she spotted Jason standing outside with his legal team. He was immaculate, as always, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled. But his expression when he saw her, just the briefest flicker of something uncertain, told her she had already rattled him. Good. Inside, the hearing was brutal. Jason's lawyer painted a picture of a devoted husband who had been blindsided by a selfish, unstable wife. They spoke of Layla's sudden departure, framing it as abandonment rather than escape. They used her dedication to her career against her, implying that she had never prioritized family the way Jason had. Layla sat through it all, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. And then it was her turn. When Monica stood, she dismantled Jason's lies piece by piece. She presented evidence of his financial misconduct. She highlighted the real reasons Layla left: his control, his gaslighting, his emotional abuse. But it was when Layla herself spoke that the tide began to turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. Instead, she spoke calmly, clearly, methodically, laying out the years of slow suffocation she had endured. She detailed how Jason had cut her off from friends, from financial independence, from her own self-worth. And when the topic of Olivia came up, her voice grew even stronger. "I have always been the one to care for Olivia," she said, looking directly at Jason. "I have been the one to put her to bed every night, to hold her when she's sick, to make sure she feels loved. Jason has treated our daughter as an accessory, someone he can use when it's convenient for his image. I will not let him do that anymore." Jason's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. By the end of the hearing, the judge denied his motion for full custody. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. As Layla left the courtroom, she felt Jason's eyes on her. "You think you've won?" he murmured as she walked past him. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge of frustration beneath it. She turned to face him. "No," she said. "But I'm not losing either." Jason's expression darkened, but Layla didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She walked away, head high, shoulders back, knowing this fight was far from over. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to fight. Layla had won the first battle, but she knew Jason would never accept defeat so easily. The hearing had only ignited his fury, and she could see it in his eyes that day in the courthouse. He wasn't finished with her. If anything, this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Jason launched his counterattack, using every weapon in his arsenal to break her resolve. The first strike came in the form of a vicious public relations smear campaign. Articles began surfacing online, whispers at first, then louder accusations, all designed to tarnish her reputation. The headlines painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had abandoned her marriage on a whim. Some stories insinuated that she had been unfaithful, others that she had neglected Olivia in favor of her demanding career. Layla had always known that Jason's power extended beyond wealth. He had influence, and he wasn't afraid to use it. At the hospital, whispers followed her through the halls. She saw the sideways glances from colleagues, the forced smiles, the hesitation in their voices when they spoke to her. The pressure was suffocating, and for the first time in years, she felt like an outsider in a place she had dedicated her life to. Monica, ever the strategist, had anticipated this. "We counter with truth," she said, sitting across from Layla in the dimly lit office of her firm. "I have a list of journalists we can trust, people who will tell your side of the story. You need to speak up, Layla. The silence only gives Jason more power." Layla hesitated. She had never wanted this fight to be public. She had wanted to walk away with dignity, without turning her life into a spectacle. But Jason had forced her hand. That evening, she sat down for an exclusive interview with a respected journalist. She chose her words carefully, refusing to engage in Jason's tactics, but making it clear that she had left for valid reasons. She spoke about financial control, emotional manipulation, and the importance of recognizing the warning signs of abuse, without once mentioning Jason's name. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, some from strangers who had faced similar situations, others from colleagues and friends offering their quiet support. For the first time, she felt the tide shifting. But Jason wasn't finished. A week later, he requested a private meeting. Layla knew better than to go alone. She arrived at the sleek, glass-walled conference room with Monica by her side. Jason was already there, leaning casually against the table, a smirk playing on his lips. His lawyer sat beside him, silent but present. "I have a proposal," Jason said smoothly, sliding a folder across the table toward her. Layla didn't reach for it. "If this is another one of your games, Jason, I'm not interested." His smirk widened. "No games. Just an offer." Monica picked up the folder and skimmed through it. Her expression remained unreadable, but Layla could see the tension in her posture. Jason continued, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "We both know this divorce is ugly. And frankly, Layla, the longer this drags on, the worse it's going to get. For both of us. You're a surgeon. Your reputation matters. A drawn-out scandal won't do you any favors." Layla met his gaze evenly. "And what's your solution?" Jason leaned forward slightly. "We settle. You drop the financial claims. I drop the custody fight. We go our separate ways. Layla's stomach clenched. It was exactly what he wanted, freedom on his terms. He was offering her a way out, but at a price. She had to let him walk away clean.
No consequences, no accountability.
And most importantly, no acknowledgement of what he had done to her. Monica closed the folder with a snap. "This is a joke, right?" she said, her tone sharp. "Jason, you know damn well this isn't a fair deal." Jason ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on Layla. "Think about it, darling," he said softly.
You get your freedom.
Olivia stays with you. And we end this amicably. For a brief second, Layla felt the old fear creeping in, that urge to take the easy way out, to accept the offer and finally be free of him. But then she remembered why she was fighting. Jason didn't deserve to walk away unscathed. She leaned forward, matching his gaze with unwavering intensity.
No. Jasons smirk faltert. Layla.
No, she repeated, her voice stronger. I will not let you silence me.
I will not let you erase what you vedone.
You don't get to dictate the terms of my freedom anymore. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. For the first time in their marriage, Layla saw something in him that she had never seen before: uncertainty. Jason Daniels was losing control. And he hated it. Monica stood, tucking the folder under her arm. I think we're done here. Layla followed her lead, gathering her things and rising from her seat. As she walked past Jason, he reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist. Don't do this, he murmured, his voice low, almost pleading. You don't want to fight me, Layla. She looked down at his hand, then back at his face. You don't scare me anymore, Jason. And with that, she walked away.
Outside the conference room, Monica exhaled sharply.
That was impressive. Layla barely heard her. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had spent years trapped in Jason's world, bending to his will, living in fear of his reactions. Not anymore. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. This was about reclaiming herself. And for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. The day of the final hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon, heavy with anticipation, the air thick with tension. Layla stood outside the courthouse, her hands clenched at her sides, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Monica was beside her, ever composed, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in her gaze. They had prepared for this, gone over every possible scenario, every counterargument Jason's legal team could throw at them. But still, the weight of the moment pressed down on Layla's shoulders. She wasn't just here to finalize a divorce. She was here to reclaim her life. Inside the courtroom, Jason sat at his table, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit, exuding the effortless confidence that had once drawn her to him. But beneath the surface, she could see the cracks. His jaw was tight, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of the table. He wasn't as unshakable as he wanted to appear. The proceedings began. Jason's lawyer took the floor first, delivering a carefully crafted speech about his client's devotion as a husband and father. Mr. Daniels has always had his family's best interests at heart, the lawyer said smoothly. He provided stability, structure, and support, yet he was abandoned without just cause. My client is not contesting the dissolution of the marriage. However, we ask the court to consider the financial and reputational damages unfairly inflicted upon him by Dr. Williams' actions. Layla barely kept her expression neutral. Jason was playing the victim, painting himself as the wronged party, as if he hadn't spent years suffocating her under the weight of his control. Monica rose from her seat with an air of quiet authority. Your Honor, my client has provided substantial evidence of financial misconduct, manipulation, and coercive control. Mr. Daniels deliberately took control of marital assets, isolating Dr. Williams from access to her own finances. He ensured she remained dependent on him, making unilateral decisions that left her with no choice but to escape. This is not about abandonment, this is about survival. Monica presented documents, bank statements, emails, financial records, detailing Jason's manipulation of their assets. She called on a forensic accountant who had combed through Jason's financial transactions, exposing the truth behind his investments. Layla watched as the evidence unraveled Jason's carefully curated image. Every document, every number, was a strike against his facade. She saw the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. Then came the testimonies. Angela took the stand first, her voice unwavering as she described the changes she had witnessed in Layla over the years. "She was one of the most confident, self-assured women I knew," Angela said. "And then she met Jason, and little by little, she changed. He made her doubt herself. He controlled her money, her time, her choices. And when she finally gathered the strength to leave, he tried to ruin her." Jason's lawyer objected, claiming personal bias, but the judge allowed the testimony to stand. Then, to Layla's surprise, Dr. Patel, the chief of surgery, was called to the stand. She had never spoken to him about Jason, never confided in him. But as he sat before the court, he spoke in a measured, thoughtful tone. "I've worked with Dr. Williams for years. She's brilliant, dedicated, and incredibly capable. But there was a time when she wasn't herself. She was distracted, anxious, hesitant, none of which were qualities I had ever associated with her before. It became clear that something outside of work was affecting her. And now, hearing everything that has come to light in this case, I understand why." Layla swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. She had spent so many years believing she had hidden it well, that no one had noticed. But they had. Then, it was her turn to speak.
"She stepped up, Hand steady, voice clear."
"Jason Daniels is not the man he pretends to be," she said. "He didn't just control our finances.
He controlled me.
He decided where I could go, who I could speak to, how I spent my time. He made me question my own instincts, my own worth. And when I finally left, he tried to destroy my career, my name, my freedom." She turned, meeting Jason's eyes directly. For once, there was no fear. "I will not let him define me anymore." The courtroom fell silent. Jason's lawyer attempted to counter, but the momentum had shifted. The judge called for a recess before delivering the final verdict. Layla stepped outside, inhaling deeply, feeling the weight of the past years pressing down on her and lifting all at once. Jason emerged a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he didn't try to approach her. He simply stood there watching her, and for once, she wasn't the one shrinking under his gaze. Then, the court reconvened. The judge's voice was steady, firm. "In light of the evidence presented, the court finds sufficient grounds to rule in favor of Dr. Layla Williams. The prenuptial agreement stands. There will be no financial compensation awarded to Mr. Daniels. Sole custody of Olivia Williams is granted to Dr. Williams. Furthermore, a restraining order is hereby placed against Mr. Daniels, preventing any direct or indirect interference with Dr. Williams and her daughter's lives." A slow, deep breath filled Layla's lungs. It was over. Jason's face was a mask of fury and disbelief, but he didn't argue. He simply clenched his jaw, gathered his things, and walked out of the courtroom. Monica squeezed Layla's shoulder. "You did it." But Layla knew this wasn't just about winning in court. This was about reclaiming herself. As she stepped outside into the crisp air, the sun warm on her skin, she felt lighter than she had in years. She was free. The weight of the past lifted as Layla walked out of the courthouse, the finality of the verdict settling into her bones. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp air, feeling a freedom she hadn't known in years. Beside her, Monica gave her a small but triumphant nod, while Angela wrapped her in a tight embrace. "It's over," Angela whispered. "You did it, Layla. You won." Layla nodded, but the victory felt surreal. For so long, Jason had been a looming presence in her life, his control extending into every corner of her existence. Even when she had left him, he had found ways to manipulate, threaten, and invade her space. But now, there were no more legal ties, no more financial traps, no more veiled threats. The court had ruled in her favor. She had full custody of Olivia. Jason couldn't touch her, not legally, not financially, not emotionally. Yet, as she stood outside the courthouse, staring at the world in front of her, an unfamiliar feeling crept in. What now? For so long, her life had been a series of battles, fighting Jason, fighting for her career, fighting for Olivia, fighting for herself. She had been in survival mode for years, always bracing for the next hit. But now, for the first time in a long time, she had no one to fight. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Monica's voice pulled her back to the present. "I have to head back to the firm, but if you need anything, you know where to find me. Layla turned to her lawyer, gratitude swelling in her chest.
Thank you for everything.
I wouldn't be standing here without you. Monica gave her a rare, warm smile. You would have gotten here on your own, Layla. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you are. As Monica walked away, Angela looped her arm through Layla's.
Come on. Let's go home.
Home. The word had always been complicated. For years, home had been a lavish estate, filled with expensive furniture and cold, empty hallways. Before that, it had been her childhood house, where she had learned to dream of becoming a surgeon. Now, home was a small but cozy apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. When she opened the door, Olivia ran to her, her tiny arms wrapping around Layla's legs. Mommy,
You're back.
Layla knelt, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I am, sweetheart. And I'm never going anywhere. Olivia's big, curious eyes blinked up at her. Is Daddy coming back? Layla's heart squeezed, but she kept her voice soft. No, baby. But you and we're going to be just fine. She scooped Olivia into her arms, holding her close. Her daughter's warmth, her steady little heartbeat, was the only confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. As the night stretched on, Angela stayed with them, helping put Olivia to bed. When the little girl was finally asleep, Layla and Angela sat on the couch, sipping wine. So, Angela said, stretching her legs out.
What's next?
Layla exhaled, staring at the ceiling.
I don't know.
Angela smirked. You, not having a 5-year plan? Shocking. Layla laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. I guess I need to figure out who I am now. Angela studied her for a moment before nodding. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're already on your way. You're free, Layla.
You can do whatever the hell you want.
The words settled deep in Layla's chest. Free. She let the thought roll over her, filling every empty space inside her. For years, she had been defined by Jason's control, by his expectations, by his rules. But now, she could start over. The next few weeks were a period of rediscovery. Layla dove back into her work at the hospital, but this time, she didn't let it consume her. She set boundaries, making sure she was home every night to tuck Olivia into bed. She reconnected with old colleagues, ones she had unknowingly distanced herself from when Jason had dictated her life. She found joy in small things, cooking dinner with Olivia, taking long walks through the park, reading books just for the pleasure of it. One evening, she and Angela met at a cafe, a tradition they had abandoned during her marriage. As they sipped their lattes, Angela gave her a knowing look. You're different, she said. Lighter. Happier. Layla tilted her head, considering. I think I'm starting to feel like me again. Angela grinned. Good. Because the Layla I know is unstoppable. Layla smiled, warmth spreading through her. She had spent years trying to fit into a mold Jason had created, trying to be the wife he wanted, the woman he could control. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was Layla Williams. And she was finally free. Layla Williams had spent years living under someone else's control, her life dictated by the expectations and manipulations of a man who never truly valued her. But now, standing on the threshold of a new chapter, she no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor, a fighter, and most importantly, a woman reclaiming her own destiny. Her journey had been painful, marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and battles she never should have had to fight. But through it all, she had found her strength, her voice, and her unwavering determination to protect not only herself but also the person who mattered most, her daughter Olivia. For years, she had dreamed of freedom, of a life where she wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or second-guessing her own choices. Now, that dream was her reality. And as she sat in the cafe, laughing with Angela, the weight of the past finally lifted. She was no longer the woman who had once doubted her own worth. She was Layla Williams, a brilliant surgeon, a loving mother, and a woman who had broken free from the chains of a toxic marriage. There would still be challenges ahead, but she faced them not with fear, but with confidence. Because for the first time in years, her future was hers to shape. Layla had paid the price for control, but in the end, she had gained something far more valuable, herself. Thank you so much for listening to Layla's journey and for staying with us until the very end of this story. We hope you found it powerful, inspiring, and thought-provoking. Layla's fight for freedom, self-worth, and happiness is a reminder that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always a way forward. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you more engaging and emotional stories. And if this story resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for watching, and see you in the next story.